Hi folks, Glyn here, and in this, what's actually going to be a series of videos now, maybe 3 videos, I want to show you exactly what I did in the retouching part of this picture here, which you can see, and it's called Madam Spooky. I called it Madam Spooky. Now, we were so lucky when we actually found this location to do this photo shoot. We had the really dirty floor and this peeling paint background. I think it was like an old ballroom. No, actually, no, it wasn't. I'm telling a lie. It was just shot in the studio on grey seamless, which is what I probably do 99.9% of the times when I'm doing a composite, which is what this image is. So like I said, this is going to be a series of videos where I take you through every single step so that we end up with the final picture, which, just to remind you, was that one there. So I think in the first video, we're going to go through the retouching this little bit down here, which is where we retouch our model Nadine's eyes, we do her teeth, brighten her eyes and all that kind of stuff. Then we're going to do on something I call Luminosity Contrast. Sounds really technical? It's not really, but it's a brilliant little thing that I do most of the times for enhancing the highlights and the shadows in the picture. We'll then do some dodging and burning, and I think that's probably it for the first part. But in the second part, the second video, we'll then move on to doing the pale skin effect, because I wanted this to look like a Tim Burton ghostly, what was that film called? It was called Corpse Bride, that kind of thing. And I thought the pale skin would really work. So we'll do that. Then there's a technique to show you smoothing skin. And I've got a bit of a fetish with these kind of pictures where they're not supposed to look real. So just to add to it, we're going to make her head a little bit bigger as well. And then in the final video, we'll move on to where we add the flooring, which is actually a pattern, believe it or not. It's just a pattern that we've made in Photoshop. It's not a picture I've taken of any floor anywhere. And then we'll show you how you can quickly add this background in, do something that I call cookie lighting to add some lighting effects to the background, and finishing off with what I call is playtime, when we add the final look and colouring and feel to the picture. So we'll crack on then. 3 videos. Let's get on with the first video. Okay then, so to kick things off, just want to let you know that I generally, I would say 99.9% of the times, all my images are stored within Lightroom. I tend to use Lightroom as a kind of like an expensive catalogue really. I don't do as much as you can do in Lightroom. I generally use it to store my pictures and export them into Photoshop and all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to show you how I set my Lightroom up before I take my pictures into Photoshop. So here's the out of camera shot of Nadine that we're going to make into our Madam Spooky picture. But before I take it over into Lightroom, I'm just going to go up to the preferences over here. And again, this is just something that I do. Okay, you probably have a different way that you like to work, but this is just what I do. And what I tend to do in the preferences bit here is I set it so that when my image is exported from Lightroom into Photoshop so that I can get on with the editing, I'll make sure that it exports it out as a TIFF. Now obviously I shoot in RAW, so and I'm shooting Nikon, so it comes in as a .NEF. But when I export it from Lightroom, I send it as a TIFF. I shoot in Adobe RGB, which is what my camera is set at. And here's one that people always ask, why are you using 8-bit when you've got 16-bit and 32-bit with so much more detail? The reason I tend to send everything over into Photoshop as an 8-bit is because at the moment there are certain filters within Photoshop that if I use anything but 8-bit, they're all greyed out and I can't make use of them. So from the minute I send it across, it's always in 8-bit. And yeah, the resolution is 240, which is what the camera will be taking it at. So what I shall do is then I shall send this over into into Photoshop. But we're going to do something called a double raw conversion, and I'll explain that once we get across into Photoshop. But usually when I take an image from Lightroom into Photoshop, I'll come to the top here and I'll go to the photo menu and I'll go edit in, and down the bottom here it says open as a smart object in Photoshop, and that is how I'll take my image across into Photoshop. So hopefully this will just overwrite what we can see in front of us now. That's the final picture, but this is the one we're going to work on. Now when it's opened up in Photoshop here, what I shall do straight away is I'll double click on the name over in the layers panel and I'll call this original. Now like I said, this is only something that I do, and generally the reason I do this double raw conversion is so that I have something I can refer back to during the editing process to see where we started. You could, if you wanted to, do a few adjustments now in Lightroom and then send it into Photoshop. There is absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. This is just the way that I like to do it, so that when I'm in Photoshop and I'm building all the layers up as we go through the retouch of the picture, I've got that starting point that I can refer back to. So now we've got that bit done. I now need to create a copy of this original image here, which is a smart object. But to do that, what I won't do is just press Command or Control J like this, because any adjustments I make to this one on the top of the layer will affect the one below, because it's basically the same smart object. What I need to do is I'm just going to right click on the layer here, and I'm going to choose New Smart Object via Copy. And I'm going to call this raw, because this forms the second part of our double raw conversion. Then I'm going to double click on the thumbnail, and what that's going to do is it's going to open the image now up in Camera Raw. So we've got exactly the same stuff that we would have had in Lightroom, which I could have done in Lightroom. But like I said, I'm going to do it now so that I always have this starting point in my Photoshop layers. And generally all I'm going to do in this bit here now is I'm going to maybe increase the blacks just a little bit. There's no set numbers or set kind of process that you're going to do in here. This is just what I'll do. I'm going to kind of bring up so I can see a little bit more detail in those blacks and on the shadow areas as well, just so I can see a little bit more of this black ruffling on the dress there, because it's a bit too dark to see all the detail. And I'll probably just add a little bit of clarity as well, maybe around 10 on the clarity. Do I need to do that? Probably not. It's just a habit. It's just something I've got into doing there. And maybe just a little bit of sharpening as well. So we'll probably take it to around about 50% sharpening on there, because I don't generally sharpen at any other stage within the actual retouching process. I'm going to take the radius right down, 0.6, something like that. And you can see where the actual sharpening's been applied. If you hold down your Alt or your Option key and you click on the masking slider here, you'll then see it creates this kind of like alpha channel almost, where you'll see that anywhere that's white is where the actual sharpening's being applied. So the more I bring this slider over to the right hand side, that kind of limits where the sharpening's going to be. Now obviously I don't want the sharpening on the background, I want it really just kind of focused onto our model Nadine. Something like that is fine. And we'll click OK. So that now applies all those different changes, and it's only on our raw layer here. So if I turn that layer off, you can see that we've still got our original one below, and these are the changes that we've got just there. So let's have a look at some of the things that we need to do then. Kind of thinking ahead here, trying to work non-destructively. We'll just zoom in, and there's just a few blemishes, as you'd expect, on every single person that you photograph that I'm going to get rid of. So there's lots of ways we could do this, but I'm just going to do this by using a blank layer, and we'll call this, double click on this, and we'll call it blemishes. Blemishes, like so. And I'm just going to use something really simple here, like my spot healing brush. But because I'm using it on a blank layer, I need to make sure that it says sample all layers at the top here, little tick. And I'm just going to literally just go around the image here and just remove some of these little blemishes. There's things we're going to do to this picture later on, which would probably disguise all these anyway. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with actually getting a good starting point and working our way through the picture like that. So it's getting into a good habits, I guess, just to remove all these things. Oh, blimey, like we would do anyway. So something like this. Now, I'm not going to keep you there while I do this, but I'm just going to work my way around and just remove some of these. So I shall get on with that, and then we'll jump back in a second. So just jumping forward then, I've gone through the picture and just removed some of these blemishes, but like I said, I didn't need to necessarily do them because there'll be things we do later on that would probably disguise them anyway. But just so you can see, on this blank layer, we've just removed a few of those blemishes there, just using the spot healing brush. Now the next thing we're going to do is brighten the whites of these eyes. Now this is really simple. We're just going to add an adjustment layer, and it can be any adjustment layer you want because you're actually going to do nothing to it. I'm going to choose, say, something like a levels adjustment, and the only thing I'm going to do here is change the blend mode of it to screen. So obviously everything gets brightened up there. So we need to invert this layer mask so we can't see the brightness on the whole picture. We only want to see it on the eyes. So let's turn the lights off. Let's make this layer mask black now by inverting it. And I'm going to do that by going Command or Control I. And then I'm going to get a brush. And I'm going to paint with my white foreground colour so that I'm only going to reveal that brightness in the areas that I want. Now, when we zoom in on this picture, you can see that there's these red veins in Nadine's eyes and what have you. Again, normally, if this was like a beauty retouch, I'd remove those. But I think with this picture, because it's going to be almost like like the corpse bride, I said, that kind of spooky kind of look, I think these red veins are going to actually add to the picture. So for this one, I'm actually going to leave it in. But let's just bring in some of this whiteness of the eyes. So I've got a white brush, Let's make it around about 50-ish% hardness. Don't want it to be too soft, because then it's going to be hard as it gets around the edges here. Because it's soft, it'll spill over onto her eyelids. So let's just increase the size of the brush there and just bring in some of this whiteness. Now don't worry too much about it looking too bright at the minute, because it's on its own layer, we can reduce the opacity. And when we're doing this, we can actually afford to go right over here. I used to spend ages making the brush really small, trying to get into all the tight areas. But now, generally what I do is I'll do it nice and big like that. And then to remove it off areas I don't want it, I'll just change the foreground colour now to black. And then I can just come in quickly and just remove it on those areas like so. There's a little bit on the actual eye, I think, there as well. So we can get rid of it just there. Something like that. And then obviously painting in a white brush to reveal the brightness on the other eye as well. So let's just quickly bring that in like so. Not worrying too much about spilling over the edges, because again, we can change the foreground colour. We can either come over to the toolbar on the left hand side and use this little arrow. We've got a double-headed arrow we can click on to flip them around, or just press X and that swaps them around as well. So now I'm painting in black. We can remove it off these areas just underneath the eye here. Bring it down there as well, and let's just take it off the actual eye itself, something like that. And to see how strong I want it, I'm going to zoom right out. As you can see, it looks a bit too much, but it's on its own layer, so we'll reduce the opacity down. That's 0, that's 100, maybe somewhere around about the 30-ish% mark, something like that. Let's just try 30-ish, turn it on and off. Doesn't have to be much, it's just to lift those whites. Yeah, and I think that's probably enough there. So we'll double click on the layer name here and we'll call that Brighten Whites, because that's exactly what we've done. And the next thing we're going to do is just add some brightness into the colour of the eye and change the colour of the eye as well. And we can do that really simply using a selective colour adjustment layer. So we'll click on a selective colour adjustment layer. And the first thing we'll do is change the blend mode of this layer to linear dodge. And in brackets you've got add. So linear dodge add. You'll see that everything really does go like electric brightened up, majorly brightened up there. So then we'll invert this layer mask so that we hide it. And again, like we did when we brighten the eyes, we'll just get a brush using a white foreground colour and we'll just bring it in here and paint in the brightness on the eye. Now again, anywhere that you go over, just flip the colour around to using black and just remove it off those areas. It's nice to have this proper defined outline around the eye as well, around the eye there, which is good. Take it off the middle of the eye. Same again on the other eye over here. Let's just bring it in so we've got that brightness, and then use black just to paint it off the areas that we didn't want it to affect. Something like that is good, and off the middle as well. Now because we're using a selective colour adjustment layer, this is the great thing about this. Let's just bring up the properties on that now. When you originally go into it, it's more than likely going to have the colours part here set to reds. But if you change that to neutrals, you can now use the sliders in here, the cyan, magenta, yellow and black sliders, to affect the colour of the eyes. So we can see if I drag this one across, we can affect how much cyan is in the picture, magenta, yellow, and obviously the black we'll come to in a moment. But let's just add some colour into eyes. I'll probably add a little bit of blue kind of look to the eyes here. Something like that is quite a lot. Now again, when you do this, because it's 100% effect on here at the moment, this is going to be way too much, but we can lower the effect by lowering the opacity later on. But let's just get a nice blue in the eyes. Let's zoom out just a fraction. Something like that looks good. We can also add contrast to the eyes here. Where it says neutrals, open up these colours again here and just choose blacks at the bottom. And then when you use the black slider, if you go across to the right, you can add contrast to the eyes. Or if you go to the left, you can see you can really reduce the contrast. So we'll just add a little bit of contrast in there as well. Something like that looks good. And I'm just going to use the opacity now on this adjustment layer just to dial in how much I want the eyes to be brightened. So that's 0, that's 100, and let's just move out just a little bit and bring up. I just want these eyes to be quite dramatic. So I reckon somewhere around about, let's use it at 50 just for now. I mean, because we're going to work non-destructively, we can come back and change this later on. So let's just double click on here and we'll call this eye colour, or something like that. And the last thing we'll do in this little bit is we'll just brighten the teeth up here. Just got a little bit of tint of the yellow in there, so let's just get something as simple as our lasso tool and make a very rough selection of the teeth, like so. And to remove that yellow, I'm just going to do a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And where it says master, I'm just going to change that now to yellows. So I'm telling Photoshop to only target the yellows within this area that I put the selection around. And all I'm going to do is use the lightness slider and drag it over to the right there, which gives her a little bit of a Hollywood smile. Something like that will be fine. So you can see before and after, hopefully see it on your screens. But when you do this anyway in your own images, you'll notice that you can actually dramatically reduce the yellows and make the teeth nice and bright in there, like so. Okay, so that's that bit done. Just to keep things nice and tidy, let's put this these three layers into a group here, these bits that have done the eyes and the teeth. So the top layer is active. Let's just rename that one to teeth. And with that one active, I'm going to hold down my shift key, click on the one that says bright and white, so they're all selected there. And from the flyout menu at the top of the layers panel, choose new group from layers. And I'm going to call that Retouch 1. So that's the first stage of our retouch. Now the next thing we're going to do is the dodging and burning. Okay, so the next thing we'll do then is the dodging and burning. Before we do that, I want to do this thing that I mentioned at the start called Luminosity Contrast. Now, it sounds kind of technical and really difficult, but believe me, it's not. It's just a really simple way of enhancing the highlights and the shadow areas of your picture to give your picture that bit more punch. And this is what we're going to do. It's so simple. First things first, click on the layer that we called Raw. Okay, then we're going to go over to our channels. Now a lot of people get a bit jittery when we jump over the channels. We're not going to do much in here. In fact, we're going to do one thing in here, that is all. Where it says RGB, you know, we've got these 4 layers in here, these 4 channels. We've got the full composited channel here, which is what our picture's made up of, the RGB. Then we've got the red, the green and the blue. All we're looking at is the RGB at the top. And what I want to do is I want to select the bright parts of the picture, the brighter areas. And to do that, all I need to do is hold down my Control key or my Command key and just click once on the thumbnail of the RGB. And you can see straight away we get all these marching ants. So that's kind of like making a selection of the brighter parts of the picture. So we'll go to our Layers panel now, and then I'm going to go to Command or Control J to put that selected area up onto its own layer. So if I come over to it now and turn everything else off, we can see this kind of weird kind of look actually, but this bit here is the areas that we had selected when we clicked on the RGB in the actual channels there. Now I'm not going to do much at the moment with that one. All I am going to do in fact is just change it so that the layer name is going to be called Screen. Right, so that's the first part done, and I'm going to click on that and drag it to the top of our layer stack. Now I need to select the darker parts of the picture. So we're going to go to our raw layer again, go back to channels, and again hold down my Command key or my Control key and click on the thumbnail of the RGB channel here, like so. And obviously at the moment that is selected the lighter parts, the brighter parts like it did before, so we need to select the opposite of that to be selecting the dark parts. So I'm just going to invert my selection. So we'll go Select and Inverse. So now we've got the darker part selected. Go back to your layers and put that now up on its own layer. So press Command or Control J. And if I turn everything else off, you'll see now that we've got the darker parts of it selected. I'm going to change the name of that now to Multiply. Now there's a reason I'm calling these names here, which you'll recognise as being blend modes. Let's just drag this to the top of the layer stack as well. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to change the multiply layer, the blend mode of that, to multiply. And you'll see it darkens everything. Click on the screen layer and we'll change that one to screen. So everywhere, all the brighter parts get brightened. Now I want the brighter part to be the dominant area of the picture that really stand out. So the screen layer, I'm going to change the opacity of that to maybe something around about 60% in the layer, in the opacity here on the layers. And the multiply layer, don't need to add so much darkness, maybe just around about 20%, just to add a little bit of depth into those shadows. Now to do this, to finish this little bit off, we need to put both of these into a group. So the top one's selected, hold down my shift key and click on the screen layer so they're both selected. And again, using this flyout menu at the top of the layers panel, choose new group from layers and we'll call this Luminosity Contrast. Like so. And you can see when we turn it on and off, the effect that's having. But at the moment, that effect is obviously being applied to the whole picture, which includes Nadine and includes the background. So I only want it to be on Nadine. So all I shall do is I shall just add a black layer mask to this luminosity contrast group. Dead easy. Hold down your Option key or your Alt key, and at the bottom of your layers panel now you've got the mask icon. Just click on that and it automatically will add in a black layer mask. So for me to reveal it now, reveal this luminosity contrast that we've just done, all I need to do is get a brush, paint him in the white foreground colour, increase the size of my brush now, and I'm just going to paint over Nadine to bring in where this luminosity contrast effect is going to be. So let's just bring it in on the arms. We don't have to be too worried about, going over the edges here, because basically what we're going to be doing later on is adding in a background over the top of this grey. So it's not going to affect it too much if we do spill over a little bit when we're painting this luminosity contrast. But let's just quickly paint over here like so. And you can see that that effect is being added onto Nadine's body and her dress as well. So I quite like that. It's just something that I tend to do quite a lot before I start actually doing the physical side of it, the dodging and burning with all the dodging and burn tools in Photoshop. So that looks like it's kind of covered there. To check on it, let's just come over to the layer mask now, and like so, if we hold down your Option key or Alt key and actually click on the thumbnail of the layer mask, you can see what you've done there. So straight away by doing that, I can see there's a little gap, so I'll paint in there. Let's just move down, and there's a few little gaps like so. Okay, so that's the luminosity contrast. You can see when I turn that layer on and off now, that contrast is only added onto Nadine. So the whites have been brightened, sorry, the brighter parts have been brightened, and the shadows have been just made just a little bit darker. So now let's get on to some actual dodging and burning. Okay, so now let's finish off this first video by going through the dodging and burning process. And this is something that you can really lose yourself with your retouching. This is probably the bit that you'll more than likely spend the majority of your retouching time doing. But there's just one kind of rule that I generally stick to when I do dodging and burning, and that is just do a little bit at a time. It's one of those things that you can get really, really carried away with, to the point that you'll be doing so much of it, you might start not seeing what you've done. That sounds kind of weird, but I call it getting pixel blind. You just sit there transfixed on the screen that you stop seeing how much of something you've done. And the danger of that is that you overdo the effect and you completely, go way over the top, and you could possibly ruin your picture. So do it in stages. But here's how I do my dodging and burning. I don't use the dodging and burning tools directly on the picture. I tend to do it on a 50% grey layer, because as you'll see as we go through it, that allows you a lot more flexibility. So we're going to do the skin on one layer and a little bit on the clothing on a separate layer. So first of all, let's do the skin. So we're going to add a blank layer, and I'm going to fill that with 50% grey. Go edit and fill, and from the menu here we'll just choose 50% grey, click OK, and change the blend mode of this layer to soft light so that we can see the pixels below it. Now I'm going to change the name of it. It's called layer 1 at the moment. I'm going to change the name of the layer to skin. And all I shall do is I shall start using my dodging and burn tools. Now over on the toolbar here we can see we've got the dodge and burn tools here. Dodge, burn and sponge. I generally will only use the dodge tool. The range here set to mid-tones, although it doesn't really matter because we're working on a 50% grey layer anyway. Exposure fairly low, sometimes 10%, sometimes even less. So I might actually take that down to around about 5-6%, something like that, because it's always best to build up the effect as opposed to going in there too hard. Okay, so just maybe 6%, 5%, and build up. So if you need more, just keep applying it rather than having too much from the start. So, and all I'm going to do now is just zoom in, and areas where I've generally got highlights, I'm going to paint over a few strokes to increase them. And any areas that have got shadows or darker areas, I'll use the burn tool. So if I wanted to add a few like highlights on the cheeks here, just a couple of strokes over the cheeks, like so, just to brighten those up. And let's add a highlight down her nose as well, down the middle of her nose. And turn that on and off. We can see already, we can start to see the effect. And let's turn it back on. Now the good thing is when we're using the dodge and burn tools, rather than me having to come over to the toolbar and physically keep changing over to the burn tool, if I just hold down my Alt key, it automatically flips between one or the other. So if I'm using the dodge tool, I hold down my option key or my alt key, and it changes to the burn tool, and vice versa. You don't see any changes actually in the top of the of your screen here when you've got the options. You'll see nothing different. But believe me, when you do that, when you do hold down the option key or alt key, it will be changing you over. So let's add a bit of shadow down the side of her nose. I'm going to darken down the makeup she's got on her eyes, like so, and decrease the size of the brush, and darken down those eyebrows. And I'm just going to keep on working my way around now this picture. Let's add a bit of a highlight on her cheek, on her lip just there. And I'm just going to keep working my way around. I might want to highlight down her arm here, so increase the size of my brush, and let's just add a few strokes to add a highlight in. And generally, anywhere I put a highlight in, I'll also put a couple of strokes either side of it with the burn tool, so it kind of enhances that contour. Like so. If I turn that on and off, we can see a little bit of a shadow, a highlight on her arm now. And maybe do the same on the other side as well. Like so. But when you do this, you've got to really take your time doing this, because otherwise it will really... well, you either rush it and you won't do a good job, to be honest with you. Just take your time, do a little bit, come back to it. And that's all I'm doing. Anywhere with this highlights, just increasing those. And also this area here where she's kind of frowning. That there, if I darken down the shadow areas with the burn tool, and either side of it, just add a little bit of a highlight, and we turn that on and off. It's a bit more, exaggerates the frown. So all I'm going to do is work my way around it. I'm going to do the skin. On the clothing, what I'm going to do is, like I said, I tend to do that on another layer. So all I would do is I would add a blank layer again, and I'd fill that with 50% grey. But the only difference with this one is clothing can take a bit more of a punch, a bit more of this effect. So rather than changing the blend mode to soft light, I generally, when I'm working on anything other than skin, I'll change the blend mode to overlay. Change the name of that there, we'll call that clothing. Yeah, clothing. Clothing, not clothings. Let's just get rid of one of the S's, like that. And I'll then work my way around the clothing using the same thing, using the dodge tool with a really low exposure, and just build up so that then you start to see the effect. Now, just quickly to show you, if I wanted to highlight on her leg here where she's got these like leggings on, I'll just increase the size of my brush, and we'll add just a couple of strokes going down there. And like I said, if I add a highlight in either side of it, just maybe a couple of strokes with the burn tool, turn that on and off, you can see we're adding a bit of a highlight on her leg there. So all I'm going to do now then is work my way around, adding in some highlights and darkening down the shadows using the dodging and burn tools. I'll jump forward, and then we'll show you before we finish this video what actually effect this has applied to the whole picture. Okay, so jumped forward now, and I've just finished off doing some dodging and burning on Nadine's skin and on the clothing. And what I'm going to do is, where I've got these two layers that contain the dodging and burning, just going to keep things nice and manageable by putting these into a group. So again, the top one selected, holding down my shift key, go to this fly out menu at the top of the layers panel, new group from layers, and call that dodge and burn. And then if I just show you by turning this whole thing on and off, you can see the effect that's having. So that's without the dodging and burning, that's with the dodging and burning. And hopefully you can see that it just adds a little bit more kind of punch to the picture, but also a bit more dimension to it. And it adds to that kind of surreal look to her face as well by really exaggerating the shadows and the highlight areas using that dodging and burning. And it really does add some shape into the face and what have you. Now, just quickly before we finish off this video then, why do we do this on a 50% grey layer? Well, the great thing is this actually allows us to alter the dodging and burning afterwards if we've done too much or too little. And here's what I mean. If I just look at the skin layer here and turn everything else off, basically that is what the dodging and burning is doing on that 50% grey layer. A couple of things I can do. If, let's just say that the way that I've painted in the highlights and the shadows is just a little bit too harsh and it's too obvious, I can soften that down. Now I can do that by just getting my lasso tool, making a rough selection of that area, like so, and then just going filter, blur, and Gaussian blur, and just adding in a small amount of blur. Now if I really do ramp it up, you can see that when I turn that on and off, the way the shadows and the highlights blend into each other is a lot more pleasing than being a real defined shadow and a defined highlight. So that's one thing, that's one of the reasons, a big advantage of using it on a 50% grey layer. But also, if you do too much and you want to take it off somewhere, if you'd done the dodging and burning on the actual picture itself, you wouldn't be able to do this. You wouldn't be able to remove it necessarily. But because it's on a 50% grey layer, I can now get a brush and I can just change the, if I go to, let's say I've got a black brush at the moment, where it says H, S and B, the hue, saturation and brightness. If I change the brightness to 50, that gives me a 50% grey brush. So what I could do, let's just say I've done too much on the hand here. I could actually paint it away because I'm painting back to 50% grey. So it allows me to get rid of areas that I actually thought I've done a bit too much on. But also, if I didn't want to paint it away completely, I could paint with a brush at maybe 50%. So it knocked down the strength by 50 and wasn't such a hard effect. So that's the reason, I hope that makes sense. I hope that is the reason why we do it on a 50% grey layer as opposed to directly on the picture. So that's video one. The second part, like I said, we're going to move on to doing that pale skin effect and then bringing the head a bit bigger and a few other little things as well. So that's it. Keep an eye out now for video 2 and I'll see you soon.